This seems like it was a rather quiet affair for Prigozhin's funeral, but there was enormously high security.
The Russian government seems intent on suppressing Prigozhin's symbol as a figure of resistance to Putin's incompetence, and seems intent now perhaps on eradicating the Wagner Group altogether. I think we should take a look at the tight security at the funeral for Prigozhin in the context of reports that the Russians have demolished grave sites for fallen Wagner fighters across Russia. There was when Prigozhin was killed, presumably at Kremlin instructions, there was some speculation that the Kremlin would try to use the Wagner Group because it's so useful to them in Africa. It wasn't ever clear to me that the Kremlin would be able to maintain the loyalty of the Wagner soldiers and officers having assassinated their chief and
Have we just lost you? Are you still there, Daniel?
Wagner. I am here. I am here.
We've got you back, Daniel. I can hear you. Sorry, please carry on.
That's all right. It looks like the Kremlin is trying to repress the memory of Wagner and avoid it becoming a rallying cry for those, let's call them on the right, the disgruntled front fighters who are coming at Putin or who would be willing to come after Putin from the right, as opposed to the liberals. I think Putin regards that kind of opposition as far more dangerous. So I think what you're seeing with this, the tight security in the funeral and the reports of demolishing Wagner graves across Russia, if those reports are true, is an answer to the question what Putin wants to do with Wagner Group. And I think the tentative answer so far is demolish it.
Would that not change Russian influence across Africa, which is seen as so important to the Kremlin for, both resources and influence worldwide? We've seen pictures, haven't we, Daniel, of, Yevgeny Prigozhin meeting African officials, being, rejoiced, celebrated by many in the Central African Republic. It was clear that he had a degree of popularity there.
It is true that Wagner had become a player in a number of African countries, using its muscle and basically looting those countries to the benefit of the Kremlin. So you're absolutely right that Wagner has assets for Russia, but I think Putin seems to be more concerned about the potential threat to him. In any event, I expect the Russians may try to maintain Wagner's influence in Africa, taking it over, but I doubt whether it will work given the treatment of Prigozhin and the funeral. And if these reports of demolishing grave sites of Wagner fighters are true, I doubt Wagner fighters would be very well disposed toward new Kremlin-installed leadership of Wagner. So I think there is likely to be a weakening of Wagner influence in Russia and opportunities to weaken Russian influence generally in that part of Africa.
Daniel, what about those fighters themselves, those fighters who for years have been loyal to Yevgeny Prigozhin, who followed him around the world on Russian-backed, Kremlin-backed causes to bring their influence and power and weight and military might to those places to bring change there. There are calls, I noticed tonight, from some Russian fighters who fight for Ukraine, for those Wagner fighters to come join with them and fight on the Ukrainian side of the war. Is there any chance that could happen?
I can't speak to the choices that individual Wagner fighters or subunits in Wagner are going to make. But it is true that in history, disgruntled frontline fighters who were loyal to their commander tend to look at a betrayal of that commander as a betrayal of them And so I wouldn't be surprised if this turned out to be true. The question is, how strong will these Wagner turncoats become? How many will there be? What will happen to them? I can't imagine Wagner reconstituting itself entirely on the Ukrainian side. And for one thing, it's committed atrocities in Ukraine, and the Ukrainians have no love for it. Individual fighters might come over. But I think it more likely than not that we have seen the end of Wagner as an effective force. It may be reconstituted under that name for Kremlin purposes, but it's more likely than not that Wagner's elan, its strength, its esprit de corps, in the worst possible causes, to be sure. But I don't think that will continue.
Prigozhin was killed a week ago, Daniel. Is Putin in a stronger position in the Kremlin tonight than he was then?
Yes, but as time goes on, a regime that relies on assassination and murder of its opponents is brittle and more subject to challenge. If the war in Ukraine goes badly for the Russians, and it might, Putin could be vulnerable. Russians now know that he will kill anybody who stands against him, and at some point, the decision might be we're not his servants, we're his hostages, and we have to act. That's pure speculation on my part, but there is a history of political turmoil when Russia loses wars, and right now, I doubt there are many loyal, committed, serious admirers of Putin in the leadership. I think these are people who are going along with him for now because they have no choice.